Yeah, Dan Wilson. Live in Austin now. Lived in San Antonio for 10 years. Hope to come back. Um, so that's why I like coming here periodically, and getting to do this is an added bonus. So I do front-end development, and I usually during the day I'm dealing with architecture and figuring out how to organize code and get everything set up for our team of developers. But what I really enjoy doing is making things move. So what we're going to talk about is the Web Animations API. It's a new way to do animation on the web. So I do have slides available at this URL. If you don't want to type in that much, you can type in less and just go to my Twitter, Dan C. Wilson. Put the links there on my latest tweet. And I'll come back to this too at the end if you want to reference it later. So let's just get going. So prior to now, ways that we've known how to animate on the web. jQuery Animate was a popular one, easy way to get animation going for developers, but it has performance issues. Has had. They're actually improving it with some of the jQuery 3 stuff, but it can lead to performance issues, and it's not always the best option. Request animation frame. That's one that does get a lot of performance issues resolved, but you're going to have to do a lot more calculation and figure out where things go and leave it up to the computer to decide when to show it on the screen. So it may not always be the best option. There's libraries like Greenstock and Velocity. They can do really amazing, powerful things, but they are third-party libraries. They add weight to your pages. Sometimes they're overkill for what you need to do. But they can do really impressive things, and performance-wise, they actually can be very performant. CSS transitions and keyframe animations, one of my favorites. Straightforward. Once you get the hang of how to do it, you can latch onto hardware acceleration and get that performance that you need because the GPU handles it for you. But you lose a lot of flexibility. It's declarative. You're not able to use variables and dynamic values. There's SVG animation, again, very powerful, but limited to SVG elements, not just your normal HTML DOM. And lastly, you could use set timeout, set interval. Not recommended. You're definitely going to have, not definitely, but you're likely to have performance issues and other issues. That's why things like request animation frame came along. So I feel we can do better. We have a lot of great options, but they're disjointed. So how do we fix that? We add one more way to do it. And that's where the Web Animations API comes in. And its goal, it's in the W3C, it's in draft, it's the draft spec right now. And the goal is to unite the various SVG, CSS, JavaScript ways to animate. So anything that you can do in SVG, you're going to be able to do something equivalent in CSS, JavaScript. And the focus of the API is the JavaScript form of it. So this is exciting. So what? Actually, Web Animations API, sorry. So again, benefits of SVG, CSS, JavaScript, and hopefully trying to avoid some of the things that are less ideal about each of those. That's the goal. So the goals, the things that you're going to want out of this and that are driving the whole implementation of this by the browser makers are getting that hardware acceleration you get from CSS, getting the flexibility with dynamic values that you get from JavaScript, getting control of timeline and playing, pausing, reversing, speed, rate that you might get from a library like Greenstock, and callbacks, which are available in some of the other things, such as when you finish, do something, etc. So this is kind of where it's going, and today we're going to talk about what's available today. This is an upcoming spec, so it's not final, but browsers have started implementing it and exploring it. Chrome and Firefox have led the way. Microsoft Edge it's at a medium priority, likely to be implement it, but they haven't specified a timeline. And Safari doesn't say anything about a lot of things, and this is one of the things that it doesn't say anything about. If you view these slides, there's a great article on how Chrome is implementing the API, and basically the way that they've implemented it now in the browser is that CSS animations and these new web animations from the web animations API are actually using the same engine underneath. So whether you use CSS or this API, you're going to get that hardware acceleration. But if you use the API, you're going to get the added benefits that we're going to talk about. Chrome has also been Google's been spearheading a polyfill, which is awesome because that means we can use it today, even in the browsers that don't implement it, or pieces that Chrome hasn't implemented yet, or Firefox. Performance is not perfect, so if that's really important, you're probably going to want to still do one of the other methods. But again, it gets us the ability to start playing with it earlier rather than later, and kind of learn what's good with it, what's not good with it. And so one of the key ways that we can use it today is elements in the DOM now have an animate function. And we're going to take a look at kind of what that involves. So with an animation player, you're going to be able to do things like play, pause, finish, cancel. Play and pause, pretty self-evident. Finish, just it'll jump to the end. Cancel will jump to the beginning of your animation, your beginning state. And then we also get 4 extra things. Play state, which tells us if it's playing, paused, finished, canceled. And then reverse, to play it in reverse. Current time, jump in the timeline. So if you want to jump halfway through, you can actually specify the milliseconds and jump to that time. Or the playback rate, kind of specify if you want a double speed, 3 times speed, half speed. So those are the things that are available. So let's talk about just the generic way that we're going to create a player. So depending on what you're familiar with as far as animations, if at all, this is going to be most similar probably to how CSS works. And so in this example, hopefully size is big enough, but we've got, we fetch an element in JavaScript, just getting this toAnimate element, and we call .animate on it. And animate takes 2 parameters, an array of keyframes with properties inside of it. So I've got an array here with two objects, and I'm specifying a begin and an end. So transform scale 1 to transform scale 0.6. And then the second parameter is an object with all of your timing functions. So again, if you're familiar with CSS, this is going to look very similar. You're going to have a duration in milliseconds, number of iterations, direction, whether it goes forwards or backwards, how the fill works, the fill mode, delay and easing. And you're going to be specifying these like you would JavaScript, like if you're just specifying properties on the style of an element, so strings for values and everything.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you know if any of the modern editors are aware of the parameters for these functions?
An example of an editor like Sublime Text or not that I'm aware of. If the best place to play with these is
it makes coding easy when you don't remember all of the values.
Yeah. That's why I usually have a reference up. It's emerging, so it's.
Well, some of them are pretty good because most of the editors are open. They can add new stuff easily just by adding some sort of.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of them have it, but I don't know of one.
Because if it's close to being released as a standard, you think they're probably already there. So, this kind of stuff right here is just like adding content to a CSS editor.
Yeah. It would be something to check out. I'm not sure though.
Okay.
But yeah. The way that I learned most of this was just opening up the Chrome console and the Firefox console and doing it in there and seeing what autocompletes in there. So, something just like inspect an element and launch our console and get element ID. And I don't actually know of an element, so. and then say dot, well, set it up as a var equals, and then a dot animate. So animate shows up as a thing, and then go from there. So that's kind of how I started piecing all of this together. Because the thing is that very few people are talking about this so far. It's starting to become more common. Google's talking about it more at some of their stuff. They've mentioned it at the Chrome Dev Summit that's going on right now. So more people are talking about it, but if you look online for Web Animations API, you're not going to find much other than a spec, which is daunting, but kind of fun. Depending on your personality. I found it a little fun. So here's another example of animating multiple properties at the same time. So I can do a transform and an opacity, and I can specify where this happens. So by default, it's gonna, if you have 4 properties, it's gonna divide it into thirds. So your start state, third way through, 2/3 way through, and all the way. So really, this is the same as, oh, I took that slide out. It's the same as if those offsets weren't there. But if you wanted different offsets, so make this 0.5 and 0.6, and that'd be 0.1, that's how you specify a different time that these changes would happen. So again, it kind of looks like CSS in a lot of ways. We've got our properties we're changing, or the time that we want them to happen, and then all of our timing function stuff in the shorthand for animation. Which, again, we kind of mentioned it, but if an equivalent already exists, why even bother with this new API? And it's really just to take those benefits in CSS and provide them in JavaScript. So again, hardware acceleration is a big one, and but we're introducing kind of the use of variables instead of just declaring it in a CSS file, so you can do things on the fly, and then getting that extra control of timeline and playing and pausing. So we're going to take a look now at just some of the examples of what's going on here. So I also forgot to mention that I have code pin collection as well. So again, if you take a look at the slides, there's going to be code pin links throughout to get so you can see the code samples more than just on the screen. So again, we kind of set up an animation, and then once we do that, we get a reference to a player, and then we can start calling those properties on it. So if we just want to set the current time or read it, we say player.currentTime. And one thing that you could do here, for example, one reason this might be useful is syncing animations. So as an example, we've got two dots animating here that are not synchronized, but they're the same animation. They're just have a different start time. So I press the sync button, and the second one, I copied the current time from the first one and set it to the second one. And so now they're synced. And now I can just set a random time on the second one, and they're back to unsynced. So if you need to kind of get animation on the same page, that's one way to do it. There's other uses you could do with this, but that's a common one. The max value of that is going to be the delay that you specified plus the duration times iterations. So if you've got a duration of 1 second and you've got 3 iterations and a delay of another second, that's going to be 1 times 3 plus 1 seconds.
So it's relative to the total duration of your animation.
Right. So again, if you've got 3 iterations and again, let's take it as 1 second duration and 3 iterations. If I set it to 500, and this is in milliseconds, I should say. If I set it to 500 milliseconds, that's going to be halfway through the first iteration. If I set it to 1,000, that's going to be at the end of the first iteration. And then if I do 1,500, that's going to set me to the halfway point of the second iteration, all the way to 3,000, where it would be finished. Yeah. Okay, so player controls and play states. And this one I'll actually open up the code pin for, but again, we kind of mentioned you can pause, play, cancel, finish. So, and that's through the play state property, which is read write. that is read, and then to write, you would actually call the methods pause, play, cancel, finish. So if we take a look at this demo here, probably should have opened it before. Make sure it loaded, because my internet is not working. Well, we can come back to that maybe. But it's what it says. It's playing, pausing. You can get the idea of that one. So now we've got player playback rate. There's an X outside of the box. I knew I should have set a smaller font size or a bigger circle. But anywho, playback rate. So again, just a simple read-write property that you get once you've created an animation. It looked all right for me earlier too, thank you.
I was just saving you the grief.
First time I've seen it like that, of course, that's how it usually works. But this is playback rate, so 1 is the default, and then you can set it up to 0.25, and I got this animation set up so that it's randomly choosing something between 0.2 and 2. So now it's 1.8, so it's going a lot faster. 0.9, half as fast as the 1.8. So instead of having to change your duration and know exactly how you're going to do it, you can change this on the fly. Something I've used this in several. Actually, we started to use the Web Animations API on some of our client projects at my company, and we've used this in a timer, so that we've got something that's rotating around, like filling a pie, and that's our timer, and that's going to be always 60 seconds or whatever it is. And then it's also pulsing as you get closer to the end, and so that pulsing actually increases as you get closer, and we do that through changing this playback rate. At a certain iteration, we make it faster, make it faster, make it faster, and also. Yeah.
Maybe mix the API with any 3D stuff.
3D stuff, like it's more designed for like. I guess if you wanted to do some 3D transforms and stuff on elements, and yeah, I've done just some basic swinging door type stuff, but nothing along the lines of what you might be able to do from Canvas or anything like that. And again, that's going to be kind of a different approach than this. I'm not sure how well this would work in kind of that environment. But again, if you're doing stuff that you could do in CSS, is going to map really well here, and a few other things will too, but not everything that would do it. But if you can do it with CSS, you're going to be able to do it here too. It's kind of the rule of thumb that I take, at least with it. Let me see if this did not load. Oh, no, it did load. So this kind of plays into the playback rate as well, and I'll go ahead and get that one loading as well. So we've got here just some circles that move. That kind of looks like a guy walking, a little blobby thing. So, and I've got a player going on each thing. So, I've got here a head, a body, controls for all of this. And I've got a pause here. So again, the head, it's now stopped moving. Or I play it and I press the 2 times button and it goes twice as fast. So, in the pause, what I'm doing here, these little ranges, that just shows where it is in the timeline. Just simple things that we still get kind of that performance that we want in the ideal world once this is fully implemented. But in Chrome and Firefox, we do get Chrome right now. Firefox should be soon be able to do the same stuff. We get that performance that we might get from CSS, but we get more. We get that plus more, and that more is these controls. And that played, so let's replay that. Okay, so here's an example, kind of like what I was saying with the timer countdown. It's getting smaller and faster, pulsing as it goes down. And once it reaches 0, that's the end of the animation, and we do some stuff. And this just shows some stats, but basically the stats say that current time, that timeline that we're talking about, it's going to account for the increased playback rate. So even though we're talking about milliseconds in the current time, if you've set it to be 10 times as fast, you will get to your max current time 10 times faster. And I don't think I need to go into that. This explains that more. It's hard to explain, I guess, well. But current time and playback rate do play together. It's not just the current time is not static. It's not always going at 1 second. Is not always going to be 1 second. It's if you're playing twice as fast, you're going to get to that 1 second faster. That's the way to explain it. I knew there was a way. Okay, so there's my little button moving again, and so those are some of the key things that we can do today in Chrome without a polyfill and with the polyfill. But the catches, as I've mentioned, native browser support not fully there, and in some browsers not even started. The spec is not final. It's in a pretty stable place. There haven't been many changes in the last. In this 2015, there haven't been many changes, but they do happen. Things do get renamed. Animation Player used to be called something else, and I think we're going to rename that to Animation. But little things like that don't matter as much. There are some minor inconsistencies with CSS, and I think that's just a current implementation. Example of that is if you're doing a CSS animation, you don't always have to specify your 0% and 100%. It'll just assume based off of what you originally had. But here with the API, you do always have to specify your start and your end. So there's just a few inconsistencies, but largely it's the same. But really, some of the more exciting features are yet to come, which leads me to some of the exciting features that are yet to come. So everybody's really excited, and we're going to keep going on this train. Some of the things that I get excited about that are coming, this is in the polyfill right now, but it's not natively implemented in Chrome yet. It's actually implemented in Firefox, but Firefox doesn't have the other stuff that makes it useful yet. So it's kind of it's not chicken or egg, it's just something exists, but you can't get to it yet. But once they get that first part, this will be ready. So earlier we were talking about to get your references so that you can actually do stuff with the player and use those controls, you need to store a reference to it. You need to say call animate on it and store off a variable, to a variable that has it. But this will let you just call document.timeline, .get all animations, and you then get all the animations. So something you can do with that is you get a return an array of all your animation players, and then you can perform an action on all of those. So in this case, I've got 10 or so dots moving around, and I don't have references. I didn't store off references when I created them, but I say pause all, and it usually works. So we'll go to the code pen because that one likely works. And it has more dots, so it's even more fun. So these are all 250 animations I created with random durations and opacities and speeds. And then say pause all, and all of them stop, play all, and they all resume. And again, because I'm using the polyfill, you might notice there's like a little stutter there when the pause. Because there's 250 animations and it's a polyfill, but it's kind of cool that we're going to be able to have that in a more stable way. So I like that. I like that one.
You could write your own Starfield screensaver.
You could do whatever you want. Possibilities are endless. Well, you don't want to do 250, so make it less than that, but somewhat endless. Grouping and sequencing. This is another thing that's available in the polyfill, and it's actually not even in the current spec. It's in the spec that's even less stable, the V2 of it. But Google put it in the polyfill now. So it's grouping and sequencing. So currently we've just been talking about each element has their own animation, but in this we're talking about grouping animation. So maybe 5 elements will all kind of start at the same time because they're shared as a group. Or sequence, they will start as soon as the one before it ends. which you could kind of do if you use that finish event and just start off the next one after you finish, but that might not make, this makes more sense. So this is each element, each letter is its own element, but the way that this works is I'm not doing 6 animations, I'm doing 1 animation for these 6 elements so that they are synced. And the same with the group B, they're just doing a different animation. And then sequence is going to be similar. This is going to go 1 letter, and it just, because of the way I've set it up, it's just going to do 1 letter after the next. So that's 2 sequences. It's actually 1 group of 2 sequences, so you can combine them in that way as well. So that one's kind of interesting. There's more cool things you could do with it than just make letters go, of course, but that's one. This is one of my favorites because I don't know, I like things that move in weird ways. So CSS motion path, this is something that was originally going to be a part of the Web Animations API, but they recently changed it so that it's actually now just a property that you can do in CSS or use it in the API. You've been able to do motion path in SVG for some time now, but now you can do it on any element. So these are just divs that are circling around a spiral path. So a path, just like you would define it in an SVG element, you can actually make it go and do that. So right now I'm just animating 9 circles that are rounded divs, and they just go and go and go. Not left. So Chrome actually has this natively now. There's still a lot to figure out because there's no way to make it responsive. Like, it's a fixed path. There's no way to kind of change the view box so that it can grow or shrink. So it's very much, that animation is always going to be that size, which is why it's just kind of randomly on the screen instead of up big in the middle or something. But it's one of the cooler things to come out. It's just very early. But there's a lot of people playing with this, and I've set up a collection on finding ones that I found on here. So, you've got basic ones like a car going around a racetrack, and you can change the speed and change the direction that it's facing. And here's one that's a very small infinity thing. That didn't work. And so it's kind of some cool possibilities here. Moving things across the screen no longer have to either be defined in a very specific animation or always go linear. You just pass it a path, and it follows that path and follows your timeline that you want. So a lot of fun possibilities with that one. That's one of the things that's one of the first reasons I got into this animations API, was the promise that this was coming, and now it's kind of here in an early form. So, have we done it? Have we got the kind of ultimate solution? Do we solve all of our animation needs? And I think we all know the answer. The answer is no. There's still a lot of things that we could improve and get better, and because this does not even come close to meeting what libraries like Greenstock and Velocity have come to increase. They have their morphing effects and all these other things. But there's a lot of progress here, and I think that's awesome. And it becomes, we can do a lot of simple things without resorting to those libraries. But we've got the progress, and we've got polyfills, and that's kind of how we improve. We kind of learn from these polyfills and see what works and what doesn't work, and then we iterate again, and browsers introduce new features, and it's all good. So it's a good path, I think, and there's a lot of fun stuff to try here, but there are caveats, as we talked about. So thank you very much. If you, again, the slides are here, CodePen, Twitter, and yeah, are there any other questions? Yeah.
So obviously they're still working on new features in the
Yeah.
new version. For what's in the first version, is it pretty stable? Is it still
From what I've seen, it's been stable, but I've only been using it for a few months. I think Chrome's native implementation is pretty solid. I don't think they're going to be making many changes now because the spec is getting more defined, and the people who are working on it at Google and the people at Firefox, like Brian Bertels, is kind of one of the guys who really started this whole spec and discussion. They've been talking about this for a long time, and they are still working on it, but the stuff that they've implemented is, I think, less likely to change than the stuff that isn't implemented yet. Which is why I think they've taken it as far as they have natively, because they're pretty confident now.
You mentioned you had like a reference page or something. Was that on your website? What I was looking for is like, for example, if you wanted to add some really cool like animation effects to a standard like web app or something like that. Some places you go to get ideas, and maybe even have some just little animated little widgets and things that you can do. Just you can do some of that with CSS, but it takes time to figure it out yourself, and somebody else kind of figured out what's the right timing and path and stuff like that to show certain things. Kind of like what you've done.
So this is where I've got some of my examples, and actually I need to add a couple more to this. I just realized I've added a few, like the motion path ones, not in here, but this is where I've been keeping kind of my ideas of all the examples. So like, this is one that we didn't talk about, but you can actually animate, you can actually create multiple players on a single element. So this is actually 3 different players, one that changes color, one that changes opacity, and one that changes the location transform. So, and each of those elements has 3 players on it, so you can actually modify them individually instead of just one player that does all of it. So this is where I've been keeping my ideas. As far as like people who do animation a lot, they don't have a lot of examples of the Web Animations API yet, but they like talking about it. There's people like Val Head and Rachel Neighbors. They both do a lot of really, they talk a lot about why use animation. They get to more of the why and some of the how, but they do that. Sarah Drasner, I can write those names down somewhere, but they're really interesting people to check out their sites and their discussions on this kind of stuff. But this is where I've been kind of collecting my little examples that break down. I try to explain what's actually going on in them and how the API is using them and why the API is beneficial here versus using some other method.
Or just like oscillating icon to like tell the user that maybe action is needed here, and use something different than just be more creative. Use something besides kind of like standard run of the mill link. Yeah. Or something like that.
And just another example is the material design that Google has. They're doing some different kinds of things in there that they're not they're not crazy. Like they make sense, but they are. They fill the space where you clicked, and then they fill with a different color. Like
I mean, like if you use jQuery, a lot of their controls have built-in animation characteristics as far as like smooth, expand, collapse, things like that.
Yeah.
Where you take advantage of some of those features.
Yeah, and so this is at the browser level, so it's there's not just like a big community right now that's saying here's all the cool things you can do with this, but you can do most of the things that other recommendations are made, like those people I mentioned and other stuff. Like the Web Animations API can handle those things and might even be able to handle them in ways that they originally might not have thought of.
And also just in terms of development, it seems like it'd be easier to keep all of your action-oriented code in JavaScript as opposed to have to put animations in CSS and leave CSS strictly for just formatting.
Yeah, like people debate that, and I'm on the fence of it. I like putting as much as I can in CSS usually, especially if it's just a simple animation that's just going to be fade in or just go from state 1 to state 2. But if you're really doing something with more states in between and wanting that final control, like JavaScript totally makes more sense in my book. And like you said, yeah, like sometimes it's nice just to have strictly layout in their preferences. Any other questions?
Could you show us just a really quick example of the sequence and code, how that works?
Yeah, I definitely glossed over that code-wise. I think those are the unlabeled ones. Yeah. So we'll take a look at the sequencing one. I think that one's the more interesting. Actually, it's also the more complicated one. So let's just take a look at the grouping one first, at least. Too far. Is that semi-readable?
Yeah.
Let's go a couple more if we can. We don't really need that one. So again, just each element has each letter has their own div. So then I'm just getting an array of each of the items in the first group and then all the items in the second group. And then, so earlier we were talking about the .animate function, and it takes your keyframes, and then it takes your timing function information. The way that this works is through the other way that's going to be coming, because .animate on an element is only one way that animations are going to work. It's just the way that it's been implemented so far. There's other ones that are coming, and one of those ways that's coming is to create a keyframe effect, and then add that to the animation. So the keyframe effect is going to be similar to how the keyframe array looked again. So again, I've got scalars and translations. Scalars are for group A and translations are for group B. And then I've got my timing function. And basically I take my two arrays of elements and iterate through each of them, create a new keyframe effect for each element, and then push it to an array that I call keyframe effects. So the keyframe effect constructor takes the element that you want to animate, then your keyframes, then your timing. So instead of calling the animate on and passing scalars and your effects and timing, now you're just adding your element as your first parameter on this new constructor. Then you create a new group effect, pass it your keyframe effects, and then play on the main document timeline. So it's a different, you're kind of working in a different way, but you're coming to the same effect. You're still ultimately playing. So you would also use this if you didn't want to play it immediately. So when you call .animate, it immediately plays, unless you immediately call .pause after you create it. This is a way that you can set up a ton of animations and not actually play them until you say document.timeline.play animation. Sequencing is going to be very similar, except instead of a group effect at the end, you're going to call sequence effect, and it's just going to iterate through that whole array of keyframe effects that you got.
That's cool, because that's when you showed, like, an example with the circles and everything. It's the first thing I thought of, well, if I wanted to keep these all in sync, how would I, kind of bundle it all together?
Yeah, and this is going to be the way that you want to do that. I mean, you can do it without this, but organizationally, this makes more sense, and this way you're really starting at the same time. The other one, they're going to basically be the same time, because even on my 251, like if you look at the start time, they all start at the same time. But this ensures it and keeps them together on the same timeline, so you're pausing them and playing them all at the same time.
That seems like it's probably more efficient because under the coverage you're probably creating fewer objects that need to be.
That's the expectation. Yeah. And again, since this is polyfilled, currently like it's only available through the polyfill. It's not at the native browser level yet. You don't really have that, but the intent with the native browser is that it's going to be better for the performance, creating less. Yeah. If there's no other questions, I appreciate y'all having me and listening to me talk about how much I like motion on the web. And if you do have other questions, that's my contact, or I am here in person too, so that works as well.
All right, awesome. Thanks very much, Dan. That was great, and thank you everybody for coming. If you have any feedback for us, please let me know if there's things that you want to learn about, or if there's things that you'd like to present on. Please pass that on to us. You can talk to us on Twitter or through meetup.com. And also be sure to check out the Talk Cook Tuesdays on our Meetup account. Gene puts those together so we can have kind of informal lunches every here and there. So check that out as well. And also, I forgot to put these out earlier, but in case you don't have one, we have stickers. So if you would like a sticker, there's stickers up here. So, thanks.
Yes. I do want